Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Next on the agenda is ordinances, and we only have one ordinance tonight. Usually we have ordinances for second vote, a public hearing and second vote, but we had none introduced last month, so we only have one ordinance tonight, which is an introductory ordinance, and we will have a second reading and public hearing of that at our next meeting. But one thing we've done this year that we've implemented is, even though we're not having a public hearing on the ordinances we introduce, instead of having the public wait to the final meeting to ask questions, if they want any clarification on the ordinance itself, we have been allowing questioning, not commenting, but questioning about the ordinance. So we will do that after the vote to introduce the ordinance, and you'll have an opportunity to comment if you'd like, or ask questions, I should say. So with that, Mr. Mills, can you please read ordinance 22-19?
Yes, Your Honor. By title, creating a new article within Chapter 9 of the Municipal Code, Boards, Commissions, and Committees. Article 9, Transportation and Circulation Advisory Committee. And as you indicated, Mayor, this is for introduction. And I would ask you all for a motion to do so. Excuse me. Further, should note this ordinance will be further considered for public hearing, second reading, final consideration on August 21st of this year at 7 o'clock.
Okay, so before I ask for a motion to introduce it, I just want to say that this body has tried to have foresight, and we are attempting to do some really good things in Morris Township. And this Transportation and Circulation Advisory Committee, I think, is really groundbreaking in the state of New Jersey. Other municipalities have looked at being smart about how they plan, but this really is a big step forward, not just for our town, but I'm hopeful that other communities eventually will mimic what we are trying to do here. And I really think we're creating a committee, hopefully tonight. Where that committee goes will be their decision. We're going to give them some direction. But I really do think this is really groundbreaking work that we're trying to do here, and I look forward to nominating people to the committee and having them come up with a great strategic plan like we heard earlier for MEDAC. So with that, this committee is so important to me that I would like to make the motion to introduce this ordinance. And I would like to add, is that okay, Mr. Mills, if I make the motion to introduce?
Robert rules frowns on it, but I think you can get away with it.
Then if Robert rules frowns on it, I will let somebody else make the introduction if anybody so chooses.
Why don't you do it, sir?
Okay, so I will move to introduce ordinance 2219, and I'll ask for a second.
Second.
And before we take a vote now, we will open it up to commentary from the committee. I believe Ms. Wilson has a comment, and maybe some others have comments too.
I do. I am the chair of the Transportation Standing Committee, Transportation and Circulation Standing Committee, and Mark is the other member of that committee. Mark and I have been working with Tim. I have a statement that's going to be about 10 minutes, so just a little heads up ahead of time. Mark and I have been working with Mr. Quinn to develop an ordinance that creates this new committee, which we're calling the Transportation and Circulation Advisory Committee. The most basic issue that we've struggled to resolve is to distinguish TCAC's generic or ongoing responsibilities from its more specific responsibilities or activities that may change from year to year. Our current approach is to have an ordinance that basically establishes the committee's existence and have a separate policy paper that spells out what the committee will do. I did agree to this separation when Tim and Mark and I last met. But what I did not agree to was voting on the ordinance before seeing the policy. To me, they go together, and I find it hard to vote on one without seeing the other. That's why my preference is to postpone the formal introduction of this ordinance until August. This will allow us to see both documents at the same time before finalizing either one of them. This, to me, makes for a better decision in the long run. I'd like to mention a few key ideas that relate to what Peter has so often refers to as our thought process. There's one key idea that's very important to me. In my thought process, what we're really trying to do with this committee is accomplish what I would call a paradigm shift. We're trying to move from working with transportation through a silo approach, separate departments, separate boards, separate committees, separate towns, and encourage work that's more collaborative and interconnected across departments, across boards, across committees, across towns, just like what you heard referenced in the strategic plan from EDAC this evening. I think the ordinance should say something, reflect this shift. This ordinance says nothing about it. The ordinance basically it has very limited information about what the committee will do. I, at a minimum, need to see the policy paper that spells out the specific assignments. If you looked, just referencing again, the ordinance that spelled out EDAC's responsibilities, there were probably 8 or 9 pretty specific responsibilities listed right in the ordinance, one of which was to create a strategic plan, which you saw presented this evening. I want to give you a few examples from our ordinance, and I did send this by email, but in case you didn't bring it with you, I have a couple of, I'd like to share this with the members of the committee. There's enough for everyone. So if you look at the first page of this, the cover page there is rationale. It is very important to me that somewhere, whether in the ordinance or in the policy, we communicate in writing why we're establishing this committee in the first place. If you look at the rationale statement, you'll see there's several whereas statements. We mentioned quality of life. We reference a bunch of different topics. The fact that there are many different stakeholders. We talk about we'd like to encourage people, more biking, more walking, for health benefits, for the traffic reduction. The most important statement on the rationale is the one that I put in bold there. That, to me, if someone says, why did we set up this committee? That statement in bold says it. Why? Because we find that a need exists to establish transportation as a consolidated topic and to establish a forum that promotes information sharing and planning coordination across a variety of transportation issues and stakeholders. To me, that statement belongs in the ordinance. It's enduring. And if it's not going to be in the ordinance, it should be in the policy. But my understanding is the policy includes information that is fluid and shifts from year to year. So I'm a little confused on that. I would like to see that statement included in the ordinance. That would be my preference. If you look on the next page, responsibilities. Thank you. So what you see there in black, there are 4 responsibilities that are listed. Those are the ones that are existing in the ordinance that's before us tonight. I highlighted 3 others in red, which all of the ones that I've listed there in red stem from why we're establishing this committee in the first place. So, for example, A talks about developing a transportation plan. To me, developing a plan is different than doing a separate set of projects. You know, I would like to see the Transportation and Circulation Advisory Committee develop a transportation plan and develop a plan that addresses walking, biking, driving, parking, and all the subtopics that are listed on here. So to me, giving that a direction in the ordinance is important. On responsibility, let's see here, D, I highlighted support information sharing and collaborative planning across boards and across departments. that to me connects with why we're establishing the committee in the first place. To me, that's an enduring responsibility, and I would like to see it highlighted in the ordinance. And it was in the information that we provided to Mr. Quinn that is going to be put into the policy. But to me, this is something that's enduring and should be in the ordinance. Another one, the final one, the responsibility that I highlighted was resident participation. I think that's essential. I've been to many different transportation workshops, and every workshop I've been to has emphasized the importance of, encouraging public participation when you're working with transportation issues. And you saw some of it tonight with the questions that people have. These are the types of questions that I want to encourage our transportation committee to work with by having people come to the meeting and in other ways, which I put in the draft of the responsibilities on here. The final page of the document I gave you, I called it TCAC projects. To me, these are the kinds of projects that you would put in a separate document because they are specific and they might change from year to year. So we don't need to discuss all of those tonight. I put them in there as examples of projects that I do see as, separate from the ordinance itself because they're not enduring and ongoing, although they're very important. At the top of the list, I would like to see the Transportation Advisory, or Transportation and Circulation Advisory Committee look at the special transportation needs of seniors, for example, and assess those and make recommendations for addressing them. So my bottom line here is that I am not comfortable voting on the ordinance without seeing the policy paper. And waiting until August allows us to see both of these documents at the same time before finalizing either. And that, to me, makes for a much better decision going forward. So for that reason, I am opposed to voting yes to approve the introduction of the ordinance this evening. Very important committee, but I would prefer to look at both and then do the formal introduction in August, when it would be easier to make a few changes to the ordinance language prior to the formal introduction. That's it. Thank you.
So to address, I will, in 1 second, so I will open it up for commentary. I just want to address a couple things. First, Ms. Wilson mentioned standing committee, Transportation and Circulation Standing Committee. So a standing committee, just so the public understands, traditionally standing committees have been operational committees. We have a standing committee that oversees sewer operations, standing committee that oversees DPW, standing committee that oversees engineering, finance, et cetera, et cetera. This year, this body reconfigured the standing committees to a certain extent. We combined a couple, and we created 2 visionary standing committees which don't have responsibility for any operations. One of those standing committees is Transportation and Circulation, because we wanted to be visionary about how the township could address this very important issue. The other standing committee that is more visionary, as I say, is one that's called Environment, Sustainability, and Energy, and that's another one that we created as a visionary standing committee. So that's what Kathy meant when she talked about being head of the standing committee. And Kathy and Mark are on this Transportation and Circulation Advisory Committee. They have done a tremendous amount of work bringing us to this point to be able to bring this ordinance to the township. Kathy, I understand your frustration. She has put in a lot of work putting background information together about reasons for needing this ordinance, the responsibilities that she wants to see this committee take on, and her vision for how this could be executed. Other members of this body feel differently, that the ordinance should be more slimmed down, and that we'll have the second policy paper. One promise I will make to you, Ms. Wilson, is that I know you want to see the policy paper. I will not vote on a second reading of this ordinance until we have that policy paper in place, so that we all can have an educated view of how this might be implemented. Although I must say that even with the policy paper in place, I do want to empower the committee itself. I don't want to give them too much direction. I want to give them some guidance, but like EDAC, They should be able to come up with their own strategic plan about how they view transportation and circulation within the community. The way we structured this ordinance, both you and Mr. Jorphy as being on the standing committee would be on that committee to help guide them with your own personal views about how, and Mark's personal views about how they should be doing their work. But I just wanted the public to understand that perspective of where you're coming from, where the rest of the committee might be coming from, and how my vision of how we should proceed on this ordinance, that we will have this policy document in place before a second read and final vote.
I just want to highlight, you are aware that in the ordinance that established EDAC, there's a specific language in the ordinance directing EDAC to develop a strategic plan.
Yes, and then there we have other committees, historic preservation and environmental and such that don't, and Parks and Recreation. So
It can go either way.
It can go either way. But the way we drafted it and the way the rest of the committee feels comfortable moving forward tonight is the way it's been presented. So I understand your position, and I do appreciate all of the work that you've done to bring us to this point. It's been a tremendous amount of work, and you've done a great job, quite
Can
frankly.
I say one other thing relevant to what you're talking about? The biggest struggle, at least for me personally, in working on this topic is something I've been passionate about for years. And this is hard. It's complex. There's a lot of complexities here. And like I said, one of our biggest struggles has been to strike that right balance between generic and ongoing versus specific and changing, to capture in the ordinance what you want the committee to do on an ongoing basis. I've talked with so many residents about sidewalks, and I've said in canvassing, I want you to be part of my sidewalk committee. I have a lot of ideas about what I would like the sidewalk group to do, so to speak. And so, in working with this, I got overly specific. I had to learn, you gotta back off and not be so specific. So that's been, for me, part of the challenge, getting that right balance, general, specific.
And as I said, as a member of the standing committee, you will be on this committee, and you will be able to give them your vision for how they should move forward. But again, we want to empower our people, just like we've empowered you guys to come up with a strategic plan. Empower the residents who have a passion about this as well.
I totally get empowerment,
that.
but there's only 2 real actions that are in this ordinance, and I question if the people on the committee are going to have sufficient direction to know what to do. But this is part of my hesitation on the ordinance as it's written.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McKay, you have a comment?
Thank you. I admire your passion and your thought process about this, and there's not a lot to disagree with what you say generically. But my feeling is that this ordinance is written in simple language, and it gives us the opportunity to, if and when needed, to change it. If policy shifts, the ordinance will change with it. It's as simple as that.
And to add to what you say, if we put too much policy, just so the public understands, if you put too much policy into the ordinance and then you want to change that policy, you actually have to reintroduce the ordinance. So keeping it, I don't want to say generic, but keeping it slimmed down gives the committee more latitude to take their own actions as they see fit. Mr. George?
Yeah, first of all, Kathy and I have been working probably on this since January when we reorganized, and it's been a major goal of ours to get to this point since the beginning of the year. And we've probably met once or twice each month until now. And we've had a lot of disagreement. We've learned a lot. We've worked a lot with Tim Quinn, and there's been a lot of township resources put into getting us to this point. I think my agreement right now, I think we agree on the goals of this ordinance and the goals of the committee. And I think we can get to your goals that you're talking about today too, even with the language as it stands. If the concern is that the committee itself will have the direction without it being specifically stated in the ordinance. We will have township committee members on the committee itself to provide guidance and to provide input from the dais up here so that they understand our priorities and they understand the priorities of the residents too. I think the fact that this committee will be made up of residents helps with resident participation. And that's just another way of achieving the goals we talked about. And then just lastly, from my own background, having worked in a legislative capacity before coming here, legislation, at least from what I've worked on, is usually generic and bare bones for specific purposes. And so we don't have to come back to change very minor details to delay different things. And I think we saw that with the EDAC ordinance earlier this year where we had to change it. And I would hate to see this new committee's work be delayed because of small details within an ordinance that was passed years ago. Because we have to think in that mindset is what will be the goals of this committee 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And by having a policy that's not in the ordinance that's being able to be changed and dictated by the township committee without having to go through a legislative process is sometimes quicker and more efficient than having to then legislate it and dictate it, than to have to come back to it 5 years down the road. So I appreciate all the work you've done. We've worked on this a long time, and I wish we could have full support of this, and I hope to see, I'm very confident we'll have a policy by August for the final passage, and I'm supportive of the language as it is.
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Um,
Do we want it?
On
Yeah. I don't know if we want to have a debate about what you wrote in your document. John, do you have any comments?
I do. So I will say, with regard to the issues that Kathy, you'd like to have in the ordinance, even though we introduce it as is today, we still have up until we pass it to change any language in this ordinance. Tim?
Yes, you do.
We do.
You just can't make a substantial change.
Right. So there could be some adjustments to this ordinance, if necessary. But I believe with the policy that will be presented to the committee, and as was stated earlier, the guidance from individuals, the elected officials that would be sitting on the committee, would be substantial enough to get the committee going. What I would like to recommend, and Mr. Mills, I ask for you to guide us as to how this might happen, but as far as, I know there's going to be some disagreement here, as far as the name of the committee, I think this just Transportation Advisory Committee is better than Transportation and Circulation Advisory Committee, and so I would make a motion to adjust the language, and I would support that.
Make it what?
Be called the Transportation Advisory Committee and not have circulation in the name.
So to me, circulation is very important. I think it states a primary goal of the ordinance, not just talk about transportation. So I know you and I discussed that you thought that walking was a form of transportation.
It is.
My opinion is that oftentimes walking is not necessarily a form of transportation, because if you're just walking to the park, it's more circulation to me. Circulating around town, biking around town is not necessarily transportation. So to me, circulation...
It's a means to get from point A to point B, so it's transportation. I just think it's simpler and it's cleaner, that's all. So if everyone else may disagree, and then, I'm fine.
I mean, I think it's semantics what you actually call it, but to me, circulation actually has some meaning, and it gives more breadth, I believe, to the committee itself. Anybody
No
else?
problem with that, I agree.
No problem with what? No problem.
Procedurally, hold on. Procedurally, there's a motion to amend the name of the group. I didn't hear a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, so
So now we're going to have a discussion about amending the name of the group?
Yes.
Okay.
Isn't this fun?
I will pass my time back to John if he has any more time.
Again, for me, just and the sound of it doesn't flow, number one. So that's why I'm not trying to be a pain. I just think that it just sounds cleaner and crisper. And we're trying to keep things simple with this generic type of ordinance as well. I just think that TAC sounds better than TCAC. You know, and so just short and sweet.
I would agree.
All right, so we would first then, if the discussion is concluded on the amendment, the vote would be on the motion to amend the title first, and then subsequently to introduce or not the ordinance.
Well, the title of the ordinance, yes, Transportation Circulation Advisory Committee, yes, it's right on the title. Okay. So should I ask for a roll call?
Yes, you must.
So a yes vote on the roll call would be to amend the title, and a no
As
vote,
Mr. Arbaniti suggested, yes.
and a no vote would be to leave it as
As currently written.
in the ordinance. Okay, Mrs. Emilio, please take a roll call.
Yes. Mr. Arbaniti?
Yes.
Mr. Jarvie?
Yes.
Mr. Mancuso?
Yes.
Mrs. Wilson? This
I'm on
is just,
the fence.
this is the time.
I'll say no.
And I will vote no as well.
What was the tally? Did
Three
the
to-
amendment did not carry, or did it?
The amendment carried. So I will then I will go ahead and amend my motion to pass ordinance, to introduce ordinance 22-19 with the amended title. Is that the appropriate
It actually
motion?
stands as amended anyway, but that, your motion clarifies it, yes. Was there
Okay.
a second to the mayor's?
And I seconded it.
Very good. So
And then any
we will
further
ask,
discussion?
is there any further discussion before we move on to a final vote? Okay, seeing none, I will ask for a roll call. And a yes vote is to introduce the ordinance, just to be clear.
Mr. Arbaniti?
Yes.
Mr. Jarvie?
Yes.
Mr. Mancuso?
Yes.
Mrs. Wilson?
No.
Yes. Very good. That concludes the introduction of the